Hello students, welcome to Science and Tech Updates with Dr. Vivek Rana. So we will be starting from where we left in our last lecture. In last lecture we had covered the India's nuclear doctrine and how it is relevant in current, you could say, geopolitical context. The topic for today's discussion is more or less related to nuclear energy because in our class lectures, the last theme which we were covering were related to the peaceful use of nuclear energy. And so the current topic has its base on that similar line. So we'll be decoding the term NSG. Even though the NSG also refers to the national, you could say, security group, but in this particular time we'll be focusing on the international, you could say, relation organization theme of nuclear supplier group. Now nuclear supplier group is a, you could say, informal lobby. When I say informal, it means that its terms are not legally binding. It's a voluntary organization of the countries which have, you could say, state of art technologies of nuclear energy, as well as they have access to the raw material. So this is one of the group which controls, you could say, the supply of nuclear raw material at global level, and any country which becomes part of nuclear supplier group has a distinct advantage of running its peaceful nuclear program on continuous basis. There would be more or less a continuous supply chain of high-end technology as well as the basic raw materials which we call uranium, because once you have uranium you could also generate the transuranic element like plutonium, which is currently holds the reputation of world's ideal, you could say, nuclear fuel. So now this NSG group, whenever you are covering such groups, you should have a fair idea about what exactly is the history behind its group's formation, how many current members are there in particular group, and why India is so, you could say, trying diplomatically to enter this particular group. So in last, you could say, one decade, we have got, you could say, significant progress in lot of international organizations, which at time viewed India with suspicion. For example, you could say India had gained entry into Australian group, Wassenaar agreement, and also missile technology control regime. Now, missile technology control regime is quite critical to India's interest, as we could see in recent, you could say, India-Pak clash. It was BrahMos cruise missile which has proved to be the game changer and has given definite edge to India, because India could strike with precision to their air bases courtesy the BrahMos missile. So we have already managed to export BrahMos to Philippines, but after this attack, there is a strong possibility many other nations who are facing such geopolitical conflicts might, you could say, try acquiring BrahMos from India. So also you could see yesterday also there was an announcement regarding a new BrahMos facility being constructed in Uttar Pradesh. So you can associate that why we will be able to export BrahMos if within the limited range of 290 kilometers, because we are member of missile technology control regime, which critically allows any nation to export such missiles, but there is a catch that they should not be more than 300 kilometers. In that background, the Indian version of BrahMos is roughly can travel up to 450 kilometers, but once we are exporting, the limit remains 290 kilometers. So in that background, from that theme, you could easily link why we are vying to be part of nuclear supplier group, because once you are part of the global lobby which controls the use of such emerging technologies, there is definitely a lot of benefits associated with it. So in UPSC mains perspective, you should be clear that once that entry is accepted, what exactly are we are going to gain from it. So this lecture will primarily focus on what could be significant gains if India manages to get entry in energy just like in the other groups. But there is a significant challenge why India is being opposed, and India needs to present a strong credentials to be part of this elusive group which controls nuclear technologies of the world. So I hope you have clear what exactly are we are going to discuss in this particular lecture. And once will be discussing the main theme, I will make it bilingual. But for a start, I am just sticking to the main English word. Now let's get to the history of this nuclear supplier group, and this is a quite important part from where you would understand why India's entry is opposed at global level whenever we try to make an attempt, because it's been from since you could say 2008 we are trying formally to get entry into NSG, but every time we had tried, we have faced some hurdle in from one particular nation to be specific, which is making our entry quite difficult as compared to the other three groups, because other three groups are also more or less, you could say, dual use technology groups, but this one is quite significant. Now, this group came into being in 1974-75, and the trigger event was none other than the India's nuclear weapon test at Pokhran, Rajasthan, which we know was code name Operation, you could say, Smiling Buddha. And today happens to be the Buddha Purnima. So I would like to extend my greetings on behalf of Civil Service Gurukul on the auspicious occasion of Buddha Purnima. So in that particular test, when India checked its might, it you could say alienated Western world, and there arose a deep mistrust, because they felt that through Canadian assistance we had built the Cirrus reactor, and through the different raw materials which were being procured, because India happens to lack sufficient uranium reserves to run its, you could say, critical nuclear program in its own. So in that case, the importance of Canada, Australia, Kazakhstan, the leading countries which have rich uranium reserves, comes into picture. So basically, they felt that India might be diverting the raw material, or you could say that enrichment program, for nefarious and to build the critical stockpile of nuclear warheads. So that created a bit of a controversy. And since India was emerging as a critical player in the geopolitics, so a lot of countries felt that India might be having some other ambitions as well. So to checkmate India, that India sticks to the basic, you could say, low enriched uranium. The lobby had some meetings in the London, as you could see on your slide. The triggering event is the nuclear explosion in 1974, and then the seven main countries which had the, you could say, the basic, or you could say, advanced technologies how to control nuclear chain program, they met at London in UK to discuss that how we can strengthen the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, because ever since that Hiroshima Nagasaki bombing took place, the world knew that they cannot afford another nuclear war among any major nations. And currently, already in 1968, nuclear non-proliferation treaty came into being, which was attempted at, you could say, limiting the use of nuclear weapon. It just recognized the 5 nuclear states as the official response, you could say, nuclear states, and the others were had to comply that they would not try to emulate such, I could say, the heroics for the better of the world peace. So India felt that this was non-discriminate, how you could have a particular year to decide have and have nots in this emerging technology. And so India took that bold risk of conducting the operation in 1974, but it alienated the Western world, and we had to face a lot of, you could say, critical hardships. Now, finally, the meetings took place multiple times. Those 7 countries which were behind this formation of the groups, there are no surprises. More or less, they are on lines of P5 only, with the exception of China. So basically, you could see the initial members being USA, you could say Soviet Union was the dominant player, France, and then Japan came into the picture along with Germany, France. So these were some of the major nations, along with Canada, since Canada had the rich reserves of uranium. So, so initially, since these meetings were taking place in London, this group, or you could say unofficially, came to be known as London Supplier Group or London Group initially, but eventually they formulated the current name which we are discussing, Nuclear Supplier Group. So they agreed to some basic guidelines which decided that how the nuclear energy should be given to different nations and how we can checkmate it with the help of IAEA. IAEA, in last lecture we had also discussed, it refers to International Atomic Energy Agency, because it's the agency which red flags if any nuclear program is going for some misadventure or trying to do some outrageous misadventure for which could be threat to global peace. So its headquarters is based at Vienna, and it has done a fair bit of job in keeping nuclear programs for peaceful purposes. Now, what goes in India's credit is India never showed any intention whatsoever to sign NPT, because it would have been morally wrong if it would have signed and ratified that treaty and then conducted that controversial nuclear experiment. So, more or less, India stuck to its gun and conducted the bold move. But then the ramification has been a group which has been internationally formed by a triggering event which is based on India. India is trying to get into that group. So that's where the theme becomes interesting, that India, with its strong credentials, feel that our nuclear doctrine, as we had discussed in last lecture, that has a strong, credible minimal deterrence clause. We are not at all in arms race to be the world's biggest nuclear, you could say, weapon country. We have only maintained 180, or you could say nuclear warhead sufficient to be make a deterrence to some hostile neighbors like China and Pakistan, so that they are brought to books when it matters. And also the bold use of no first use makes us appear a more responsible nation as compared to the countries, even though they have been officially designated as nuclear powers, yet they have not included such, you could say, peaceful clauses of no first use. So basically, India's intentions at the global level have been the largest functional democracy which believes in solving disputes through peace, rarely resorting to, you could say, weaponry angle to teach any adversary a lesson, unless it crosses, you could say, what we call in Hindi Lakshman. So now the topic we will be decoding that how India is trying its best to convince Western world that it should be given entry into Nuclear Supplier Group, because its historical record has been, you could say, spotless, and it's a responsible nation which one gets entry into NSG would only use the raw materials or the advanced technologies which will be available for peaceful use, because we have already said we are aiming to be a developed nation, Viksit Bharat, by 2047. And any nation which wants to be a developed nation should have a diverse energy mix, because it is the energy which is the basic engine for growth for any nation. You can check any historical journey of any developed nation. It's the energy which has fueled growth. If there will be no energy, then you cannot expect to be a major developing nation. You can see a small island nation like Japan has been a major power to reckon with, because it adopted the peaceful nuclear program to its advantage, and its rise has been quite mercurial at global affairs. So basically, there is no denying, in fact, that the countries which have clean energy in the current, you could say, geopolitical matters would have definitely have a distinct advantage in economic affairs as well. Now, the problem here is the gray area, that India is quite clear that it wants its entry, but out of the total lobby, because this NSG group has currently 48 members. Now, these 48 members have voluntarily decided that whenever a new country has to be admitted, it has to be on consensus of all members. It's basically, you could say, informal way of a kind of a veto which operates. You have to convince all members if you want to gain entry to this particular group. Now, in India's case, we are able to convince almost, you could say, 43 to 44 nations whenever we have tried to, you could say, raise this issue. But always it has been one major power which is quite strongly opposed to India's entry into NSG, and there are no surprises for guessing it, because it's the China which is red flagging the issue. And even though China proclaims that this century belongs to Asia, it is going to be the, you could say, elephant and Sino ear, but inherently it sees India as a competitor as well, and it feels that in geopolitical interest, West might use India some way to check Chinese aggressive growth as well. So current period also, you are witnessing the trade wars ongoing, and in this current India-Pakistan also, you could see the international meddling in discrete way operating. So we can say at this point, the red flag for India has been the China. China is opposes India's entries mainly on two grounds. The first major is that India is yet to sign nuclear non-proliferation treaty. So in the background, we can see that when this nuclear supplier group was formed, it was quite stringent in its guidelines. It clearly said only nations which will sign nuclear non-proliferation treaty would gain access to this elusive group. So if China feels if you are basically bending the basic premise, it is sending a wrong precedent. Tomorrow, North Korea or some other nation also tries to do the similar thing. So what moral authority would this group would have in denying that access? That why is special treatment being meted out to India just based on its, you could say, few credentials? So that's where the problem arises for India. And once again, the real hurdle is that this group was formed in opposition to India's, you could say, controversial nuclear test in 74, and we repeated that in 1998 in, or you could say, Operation Shakti. So China is quite adamant that I am quite ready to accept India if it signs NPT. Now, signing NPT would entail that we will have to disband all our nuclear warheads, which is not a possibility in current dynamic, you could say, IR perspective. So it's quite a difficult ask, and India is not ready to buckle. India just wants to enter its own term, because we have managed to get entry in multiple international groups, and the almost all major P5 nations, France, Russia, USA, UK, have been, you could say, affirmative of India's entry, because we feel that it's the right time India should be included in United Nations Security Council as well as in this particular theme. So basically, we will have to win China if we want to gain access to this, and China would on back end door would write significant, you could say, would be expecting something out of it if it really wants to bend rules for it. Currently, it's just you could say obsessed with saying that if you give access to India, Pakistan should also get access to it, and India feels that this is not the right equating two nations. Even in yesterday also you could see that Trump was equating that it's ready to open business to both the nation. India felt little, you could say, disheartened by that two countries are being equated on similar lines just on basis of that they both are nuclear powers. So this is where the India feels that Pakistan entry to NSG can be catastrophic, because there is no guarantee that Pakistan will use the entry to just enrich its nuclear peaceful program. It's already in race to, you could say, be the one of the top emerging nuclear powers of the world in terms of nuclear warheads, whereas in India there is no such race as of now. So this is where the current topic has becomes even more important, because India wants only access of its own, and it is not at all in favor of Pakistan getting entry into it, because we have seen the similar happening in Shanghai Cooperation Organization as well. We both were initially observers, but when India was elevated to permanent members, Pakistan was elevated as well. So basically, in that group, you could say that Russia, Iran, China nexus group of security, both countries got their thing. So similar equation is operating in nuclear supplier group, and India feels that it's quite wrong to morally equate two nations which have almost, you could say, diverse or almost in opposite direction history in terms of peaceful matters. Now let's discuss in the mains perspective why India's NSG entry could be a game changer for India's nuclear peaceful development program. So whenever such question comes, make sure you have a broader opinion on, you could say, your arguments. Generally, we tend to limit our arguments on one macro fact, and we tend to keep on repeating that thing. So in UPSC, always marks are allocated to students who have a broader understanding of the theme, and they can present multiple dimensions of the theme involved. So at least we should have 4 to 5 strong reasons why India's entry would be beneficial, or it could be advantageous to nations' economic prosperity. The first and foremost theme, which can be directly articulated, that once India manages to overcome the resistance from Turkey, China, You can see some nations which are symbolically mentioned, that these are some of the countries which China is able to manipulate, or you could say presented fact, just I have highlighted, which at times become suspicious of India's entry. So once we win over this small set of countries, because we have managed to win almost 40 plus countries out of 48, which is quite a remarkable achievement in itself. So this is where once we are able to win, we will have 4 to 5 distinct advantages. The first is better access to technology. So we can say the technologies can be classified as low end, high end, and state of art. Even though India has mastered its nuclear program of its own, it has been a remarkable journey right from the Apsara experimental reactor to, you could say, Tarapur nuclear reactor attaining commercial operation. We are already running 23 nuclear reactors at 6 different states, but still we can say once we gain entry to it, there is a possibility, it could be in waste management, it could be in some other way, we might get some better, you could say, state of art or high end technologies which could further help in boosting the nuclear program. More recently, we have seen rapid strides being made in small modular reactor. Recently, we tried for the thorium, you could say, derived small modular reactor. So you can say the scope of nuclear energy remains unlimited. More and more isotopes are being researched, more and more new dimensions of, you could say, programs are evolving. We can make them of their own, but it takes time. So it's a lot better to have high-end technology being adopted on short premise rather than being adamant on developing their own, because we have seen we were able to timely manage our stage 1 and stage 2 pressurized heavy water reactor and fast breeder reactor. But thorium cycle reactor, which is key to India's, you could say, supremacy, has taken almost 2 to 3 decades, and yet we have yet to master that technology. So there is no harm once we gain entry, we might get insights of some high-end technologies, and our program could get a new catalyst which could be a game changer. So first and foremost, paragraph has to be devoted to, you could say, high-end technologies, or you could say better access to critical technologies associated with nuclear program. The second could be economic justification, that India is slowly rising as economic power and it needs a better market to showcase its indigenous products. So already Make in India, Atmanirbhar Bharat has been buzzwords for current government, and once we are able to master that thorium cycle reactor, or in future you could say if we make strides in fusion based reactors, or you could say some new small modular, which we are saying Bharat modular reactors, it will be always beneficial that we once we are part of an official lobby which gives supplies to different countries or showcases high-end technologies, it will be easy for us to present those products on a wider market. Otherwise, we will have to enter into bilateral agreement. We will have to use our diplomatic, have to gain entry. So once we are able to be part of this group, this Make in India products would have a much wider parity, and you could say we could be dictating rules to multiple countries in terms of import and export of indigenized based reactors. So this is where this entry becomes even more critical for India's interest. So you can say it has potential of generating economic wealth in, you could say, short or long term future, and we could emerge as a critical player in making available clean energy option on a much wider market, which we are currently unable to do because of the suspicion of not being part of NPT and not being part of NSG. So odds becomes quite against. A nation which has a wider option, it will rely on the globally accepted players without any controversial background, rather than a country which at times is being viewed suspicion. And the current, you could say, the escalations at times also have a negative impact on, you could say, the investment propositions. So more or less, the second part becomes the economic dimension of the theme, that it might create more economic opportunities for India in terms of the nuclear program, or you could say the back-end reactors, and it has potential to generate even employment as well. So make sure the second part is totally devoted to the economic part. The third dimension, which is quite quintessential in highlighting when you are justifying what could be the significant gain for India, has to be the environmental targets. So India had made bold commitments, which we call Panch Amrit, at you could say the revised INDC targets. We are aiming for generating almost 50% of energy to renewable energy or clean energy, to say in short, and the targets quantified are quite ambitious. So in that transition period, if we want to be a responsible nation in terms of environmental goals, as we have announced to be net zero by 2070, nuclear energy as a clean energy option could be could aid India in that matter, because already we are showcasing our dominance in solar energy, but the other forms of renewable energy are quite mixed bag, because some of them have faced challenges on large scale adoption. If we look into a picture of the wind energy or the tidal geothermal energy, because we cannot just escalate them without having the logistics ready, and wind energy, we all know, can only be used by coastal states. So in that scenario, it's important that we use nuclear energy as a transitioning tool, unless the solar energy can equate it. So already in the current budget in 2025, India has shown that it will try to have at least 20 gigawatt or 100 gigawatt. 20 gigawatt target is immediate, and of you could say 20 gigawatt by 2035, and then we are also aiming for 100 gigawatt by 2047. So in that background, if we get entry into such groups, it could be quite beneficial. We could upscale our existing nuclear reactors, and already plethora of nuclear reactors are under construction, right from Fatehabad in Haryana to Kovada in Andhra Pradesh, Chutka in Madhya Pradesh, to Chaya, Mithi Virdi in Gujarat. So we have, you could say, new set of reactors all lined up, and this could be a leverage if we get a quick entry into this group. So basically, in this clean energy scenario, we can say you have to highlight that the clean energy remains critical to green growth, and we can explore nuclear energy with lot more confidence to achieve our goals once we get entry into NSG. So basically, if you are good at environmental, you could say COPs, then you could use the current COP as an example, and then highlight this paragraph and elaborate with some quantifiable environmental goals. So it will really make that answer holistic in nature, and examiner will feel that you are not just pro development, you have a larger picture in mind of inculcating sustainable development goals and rise of India as a green power. Because we have seen in case of China, a lot of time it is red flagged as, you could say, it's an economic growth powerhouse, but yet it has been little, you could say, more or less not responsible enough in handling its energy sources in path of green. So that's where the third paragraph of environment would be in your favor. The fourth one comes to the most important one. It's about the access to raw material, because more or less accessing the raw material has been headache for a lot of nations. Lot of countries do not get into the nuclear energy path because they feel that the mastering technology is first of all capital intensive, then there is a global suspicion, there is a risk of proliferation, as well as we see that Western world views nuclear energy with quite a suspicion whenever it gives access. And the most important hurdle has been the raw material. That's the reason India's nuclear share in total energy matrix continues to remain less than 5%, because we feel that we do not have the raw material which is required, even though the thorium is one blessing, which we have almost 25% of world's, you could say, thorium. India has sufficient reserve in monazite sand along coast of Kerala, Tamil Nadu, but still the main, you could say, conventional material, the, you could say, natural uranium or enriched uranium, continues to be a missing spot. And we have seen lot of countries showing interest that they are ready to export uranium to India, but the only moral dilemma comes that India is not part of NSG and yet to sign NPT, because the specific example could be Namibia. Namibia is one country which has sufficient uranium reserve. It has cordial ties with India, but then African Union, you could say, limits the use of uranium to any country which is non-signatory to NPT. So once India gains entry to NSG, it could be a game changer. We will have a large matrix of nations which could supply our raw material, and finally we could increase the realized goal of 10% energy being generated to nuclear energy. So basically, the access to raw material, which has been the main gray area, can be addressed quite confidently once we gain entry to this group, which has a strong lobby. Almost it works like OECD. We have seen, because once you have the continuous supply of raw material, there is no back end manipulation by diplomatic levels to deny the fuel or artificially inflate the prices of raw material as suitable to the main, you could say, reserve holders. So this is where the NSG topic becomes even more pertinent to energy needs. And also we can say India is on right track to develop new emerging nuclear technologies as the time progresses, because we see nuclear energy is not only going to be limited to fission reactors, as the current experiments of ITER, JT60SA or HL2M or K-star, all these are tokamak reactors which I am highlighting. These are world's fusion-based experimental reactors which are currently being carried out. So more or less, when this technology would be available, once again the similar lobby is going to have a dominant role and do's and don'ts. So it's a lot better that India gains access to such technologies at the right time without any delay, and such groups always help if you are part of these groupings. So India can better market its product on much wider scale. So you can say the commercial interest will dominate. We could even design our own rules and apply them accordingly, especially in case of these thorium cycle reactors, and make that product available to much wider market if we are part of NSG, because that would give us an official recognition. And apart from that, if you are trying to sell such products independently, there would be more diplomatic efforts than just the commercial effort. So basically, it could be a game changer if we get timely access to NSG. Another benefit could be, you could say, geostrategic, because we have seen that the world is adamant that only countries which are signatories to NPT are officially recognized as nuclear states, and the countries like Pakistan, India, Israel are not looked upon. But once you are part of such international grouping which are using it for nuclear supply, you get that indirect tag of, you could say, official nuclear country. So that also is in back of our mind, that it will help in presenting ourselves more better at international level once we are part of, you could say, all such formal groups, and it makes our credential for UNSC permanent member even more stronger than ever, because we have able to manage the right ticks on almost all major levels at the moment. And the final and most important could be, you could say, diplomatic checkmate. Just like we have seen, China is red flagging entry of India. Once India becomes member of NSG, we could use the same ploy to resist, or you could say blacklist, Pakistan entry to similar group, because we have sufficient diplomatic heft and this group operates on consensus. We have seen only China being the real problem for India's entry, which is manipulating handful of countries. But in case India gains first entry, there would be much more countries which would be opposing Pakistan entry. And just like in FATF, this could be one of the battlegrounds where India would try its best to not allow Pakistan entry, because we have seen that it has not been able to run its democracy on civilian lines, and more or less the use of non-state actors for terrorist purpose once again makes it a volatile state which cannot be trusted in enriching a nuclear program only for peaceful purpose. There could be back-end games, and it becomes even more suspicious than ever. So in a way, we can say once you have now you have a sufficient clarity why India is pushing for NSG entry, and it could be quite significant in our, you could say, diplomacy as well. So broadly, we can say it is not going to benefit us economically. It could be a diplomatic game changer. It has environmental dimension. It has scope for high access to high-end technology as well. So you are able to justify sufficiently why India is buying. So make sure after reading this lecture, and you could explore this theme on net as well, read some basic articles from some key policy makers or from governments, you will get a sufficient wide overview of the theme, and try to attempt this answer as well. I'll be ready to evaluate all those answers after you have made a sufficient ground. You could attempt this particular theme in preferably in 200 words. The question could be, why is India's NSG entry critical to its geopolitical interest? So just start with a basic background in introduction, and then the theme which we have discussed, you could enumerate in 4 to 5 broad themes, and then make a, you could say, forward looking conclusion in which you could highlight, even though India faces myriad challenges on various fronts and to gain entry, but more or less India should try its best to secure entry and present itself as a strong contender to this elusive group, which can be quite a major theme and could be a major milestone as well for India's, you could say, diplomatic journey. So I hope in this particular lecture, we got a fair bit of idea that how NSG operates, what exactly has been its story so far, how many members are there, how exactly it came into being, and finally, why is India adamant to be part of this elusive lobby. So hopefully from tomorrow, the remaining part of this nuclear energy topic would be covered in offline mode, which we as a teachers as well as students prefer at most. So get ready for your answer evaluation, and we'll be covering more or less the next major theme of biotechnology in our lecture, which remains to be, you could say, a hard nut to crack for most of the civil service aspirants, because topics are even more complex than which we are covering at the moment, the nuclear energy. So stay connected on our Civil Service Gurukul channel for more such, you could say, value addition lectures on different themes. We'll be back soon with another current affair video. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.